So I'm frequently asked, how do I fire my business partner or a co-shareholder? The reality is you can't, right? It's important to understand how corporations and limited liability companies work in order to understand how you would go about removing them from operations and things of that nature. So imagine that there's 3 levels to the relationship that a shareholder or a co-owner in a limited liability company called a member could have with the organization. The first is that of an employee. So think that they are the head of sales, right? Or something along those lines. And in that regard, you may or may not have a contract with them, but you're employing them and you're paying them a salary to do that job as the head of sales. In addition, they also may serve a role in the management of the affairs of the company, and in the form of a corporation or a member, a limited liability company, they may be an officer or a director, right? So employee, then officer, director, and then shareholder. So if you are a controlling shareholder, meaning you have more than 50% of interest, or together with a number of shareholders or other members, you have more than a controlling interest, you have potentially the ability to remove people as directors or as officers. But you gotta follow the operating agreement or shareholder agreement in order to accomplish that. In addition, if you are an officer, such as the president or CEO of a company, or have certain roles that allow you to hire and fire employees, you may also have the ability to fire a shareholder from their role as an employee of the company. So shareholders decide who the officers and directors are, and the officers and directors can make hiring and firing decisions with regard to the employees of the company. So practically, you could fire someone from the company, but you can't remove them completely if they're a shareholder from the company without going through other legal processes to do it. So if you wanted to remove them as a shareholder, now you're talking about a completely different process. You're talking about looking at the operating agreement or shareholder agreements to remove them as shareholders or members of a limited liability company. And if that doesn't work, you got to look to your articles of organization or to your bylaws. And if that doesn't work, then you look into your state statutes about how to remove them as shareholders. But the corporation may have a contract with this person as the sales manager, right, as an employee, and so you got to follow the contract that guides the employment decisions, because otherwise, then you may have a lawsuit by the shareholder and sales manager against the corporation for breach of contract. So a lot of these relationships become very convoluted, and it's really important that you begin to dissect who and what role this person is filling. Are they an employee? If they're an employee of the company, then their employment can be ended by the officers of the company. If they're an officer of the company, their employment with the company as an officer can be removed by the directors, and the directors can be removed by the shareholders. And so all of these different processes, all these different relationships, it's important to decide and to determine what hat they're wearing and what you're trying to do to remove them. But at all times, you need to look if there's any contractual obligations that you have with them as employees, officers, or directors. You also need to look at if there's any shareholder agreements or operating agreements that govern the roles of the shareholders, and potentially make them permanent employees of the company, right? So you may have another contractual relationship. And if anything, you really want to be looking to your bylaws, your articles of organization, or to your state statutes that govern those relationships. We're now entering into super complicated land. At this point, you should find an attorney who's world-class that can answer these kinds of questions for you. We here at Callagy Law are happy to answer any of these questions, whether it's this question or any other question. Contact us directly. We're here to answer.